All
Yeah.
right. Welcome, everybody, to episode 3 of LA Guitar Hang. I'm excited to have my good buddy John Storie with me tonight, and he was nice enough to get us going on Facebook Live. I didn't even know how to do that. I've been talking to John for about 20 minutes now, and I've learned a hell of a lot about podcasting and what to do. So thank you for coming, John, and educating me right now.
Hey, man. It's all about passing the information around the social media trough, I guess, right?
Yes.
Is that what we say?
Yes. Exactly. So what's been going on, man? What have you been doing lately during this COVID shutdown time?
Yeah. A lot of the similar stuff I was doing before it, just trying to stay busy and
Uh-huh.
stay organized and work on both some recordings, writing some new music, some new collaborations. Um, Also trying some new teaching methods. Teaching's an important part of what I do too. And
Hmm.
my classroom teaching at Pierce College, which is now fully online, that's been a real fun thing to dive into. So it's been a lot of the same, but I've been shifting and learning, and I just feel like like we all have just kind of been thrown in this stream, and where we got to go, we got to learn, we got to get this going. So it's exciting and it's fun to do stuff like this. Dwayne, thanks for having me for the LA Guitar Hang, man.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. It's just something new that I wanted to do. I've had a lot of, as I mentioned in the other ones, I've had a lot of Zoom hangs with a lot of my buddies, and I thought to myself, how cool would it be just to record these? I mean, some of the hangs we were just BSing about whatever, but I figured it'd be cool to have one talking to guitar players about guitar stuff, talking shop, and I'm a guitar nerd. I would love to hear two guitar players talk. I mean, what's better than that? So,
Yeah, I don't know. Hearing two oboists or bassoonists talk
yeah,
about making reeds. I don't know. No. At least we don't have to sit here and make reeds like the double reed guys do. Imagine if we had to make our own strings, right? Like they had to back in the day.
yeah. I don't even know how to set my guitars up. I just,
Dude, I don't either. That's been something I've always really wanted to learn, is how to actually set up a guitar. Not even an arch top. I know you and I are arch top guys, but like
yeah.
a steel string acoustic guitar, there's so many situations where I'm like, gosh, I wish I knew how to set this thing up and get the strings right, get it feeling right, you know?
I'm too afraid because, like, I'm kind of a collector, and I have some really nice guitars, and I'm so deathly afraid of screwing up a guitar, especially with a truss rod. Like
Yeah.
you can't. I guess you can't really screw it up, but I'm such a dummy with fixing things. If anyone can screw it up, I could screw it up. So,
Yeah, man. And I agree. I totally agree. And it's also just, it's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like anything. You want to have the right person doing that, and it's a job. It's like working on your car.
sure.
I sure wish that the cars were made these days where we could change the oil and do that stuff. I mean, my grandfather did that, but
Yeah,
my Corolla is like a freaking iMac computer. I can't take that thing apart and change the oil on it,
I
so
know. I
there's
learned how to
there's
change
there's a
oil.
lost art in that, right?
Sure. Well, the mechanics now almost have to go to school for it.
Yeah.
They have to learn how to read all the computer readouts and all that kind of stuff.
I
So,
mean, if Gibson had their way, we'd have robot tuners by now on all our guitars, and we'd have to go to school not only to learn how to play these things, but how to tune them too.
exactly. Thank God they did away with those.
I remember being at Jim's Music in Irvine in 2006 and playing that very first robot guitar that Gibson came out with, and it was in this blue color. Do you remember that guitar? It was a Les Paul with
Oh,
white
yeah.
binding.
There's a,
Yeah.
a robot guitar,
It
right?
was the first robot guitar. And I actually thought it was really a cool idea. I was like, man, guitar that kind of has an option to kind of like self-tune the strings. That's kind of cool. I mean, sounds like something that like one of my sixth grade students would think of in his guitar class.
Yeah.
Like, let's come up with, why doesn't the guitar just tune itself? But I actually kind of thought it was pretty spacey and cool. Unfortunately, I think that Gibson didn't really have the right idea, that they thought that pros like us would actually adopt that stuff, because it's our instrument. It is still being refined in some ways. I mean, it's pretty
Yeah.
cool to think we're living in the beginning of the 21st century. The guitar is still evolving. Pedals are evolving,
Yeah.
amps. I mean, we're still in the golden age of the development of the guitar. It's really less than 100 years old.
Yeah. Oh, I think the guitars being made now are probably some of the best made ever. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, some of the brands, like I play a lot of Collings guitars. I mean, those things are just like every time I play it, I can't believe I own this guitar, you know, and
Yeah.
they're just made so well and they stay in tune and they play, you know, and so many great brands. Like you play the Marquis. Is that Marchione? That correct? The way to say that, Marchione?
He actually says Marchione, like
Marchione.
with
Okay,
an
yeah,
E in
those
it.
are beautiful guitars, man.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. He is a fascinating guy and a rare luthier in that he builds all of them one by one with he has an apprentice who helps him with some stuff, but he builds flat tops, classicals and flamencos, really killing solid bodies.
Wow. Yeah.
Really slick semi-hollow design, and his arch tops, in my opinion, I mean, I've played them all, man. I've played all the brands. I played a I've played a lot of DeQuistos and D'Angelicos. I was lucky enough to get to play a lot of those pieces from various people who've studied with me who own them.
Yeah.
And you know, it's been fun to kind of judge this instrument against that. And man, it's as good, if not better. I mean, he's just a genius, man. And not, as we know, some luthiers are like players. They really specialize in one thing,
Mhm.
and then there's luthiers that are like some other players that just kick butt at all sorts of styles. They can play acoustic guitar really well. They can play bebop fairly well. They can play the blues. They can play
Yeah.
steel string.
Yeah.
And guys like that are so scary. And we sure know a lot of them here in LA.
Yeah, man. Well, that's why I started this podcast because originally I was thinking I was going to interview a lot of jazz guitar players because that's what I mostly do. But then I thought I'm going to get all different kinds of guys because I'm part of there's a kind of a blues scene here and I take part in that occasionally. And there's some great players in that scene. And you know, I think like I'd like to interview them. And there's a ton of great classical guitar players. And I
Mhm.
think it'd be cool to just interview anybody who's a great guitar player, just, you know, get to know them and get their name out there and enjoy it, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, like LA and Nashville are just guitar towns.
Mhm.
And it's so cool that and for those who are checking this out who may not understand what we mean by that, I think it's hard to deny that there is a fraternity of guys here who we all hang and we talk gear, or like my buddy Andrew Sinowick was having these kind of Saturday morning hangs over at Sharky's in Studio City for
Oh yeah,
breakfast.
I know Andrew. He's a great guy, man. Yeah.
Yep. And there's somebody who can play a wide range of styles
Anything.
really well, of course.
I'd love to get him on here.
Yeah. Yeah, man. But it's, you know, it's so cool Los Angeles has this, because you know New York isn't like that, man. You know, you
Is
go
it?
there and you don't really see guitar players hanging out with other guitar players as much. There's not like there, I mean, maybe when Les Paul was playing at the Iridium, but that was almost kind of a tourist attraction. Not like how we have guitar night here with Pisano, where you know
Yeah.
on any Tuesday night you'd go and you'd see a guy like Mitch Holder and you'd see a bunch of young kids from USC, and then you'd see some guys like me who are recently out of college and some other
Yeah.
cats who are 10, 15, 20 years older than me there.
Yeah.
There's really no city like it, man. I mean, and again, Nashville is a little bit like this. You go down to the Bluebird and you hear Vince Gill and all of those guys play, and a lot of the local session guys just go down and hang and have a beer, and they're all talking gear and they're all
Yeah.
talking stuff.
That's
Uh,
great.
yeah, and it's fun to play an instrument that's like that, man. I guess for drums too, LA is like that a little bit too. There's kind of a brotherhood of drummers, you
Yeah,
know.
it's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine, a horn player, and he was, you know, checking out what we do, and he was just like, I said, you should do this for saxophone. He's like, well, sax players don't really have a brotherhood as much as. I was like, I didn't know that. I was like, I don't know what sax players do, but and I was like, no, us guitar players, we all love each other, man. Like, I mean, there's not like this competitive thing. I mean, of course, we all want to, you know, kick ass on the guitar, but we all support each other. We all, and like I can go see you play or Will or whoever and you know enjoy the hell out of it and have a great time and just want to support it and be a part of it. You know,
Yeah.
that's like part of the scene here. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost feel like it's funny. It's like maybe everybody kind of we all have our own insecurities, whether we want to
Sure.
admit it or not. And
Yeah.
the insecurities can come from, well, that guy's gigging more than me, or that guy's got a better sound, or that guy, wow, that guy really found something, or he got the gig I wanted. And it's like, that's, as we all, for those of us who stuck around long enough and survived long enough to pay the rent as a musician, we learned that it's really insecurity. And
Yeah.
if you can turn that into you competing against yourself, then that's when you can let your guard down and just really make the hang and learn from everybody.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know. I just don't know, man. Maybe guitar, historically, it's just one of those instruments that you can, guitar sounds good when you're playing with other guitarists.
Yeah.
So maybe that goes back into our DNA as guitar players, to where guitar players would hang out with other guitar players, because unlike other instruments in many cases, I mean, I guess the brass, the woodwinds, but two piano players aren't necessarily going to sit down and play together, two drummers,
Sure.
two bassists, but two guitar players for sure. And it's very interesting over time to see the musicians who learn how to take the insecurities, because again, we all have them, whether we admit
Mhm.
it or not, and
Sure.
take that and use that to compete against ourselves. And then the ones that just remain insecure and aren't as much of a hang, or are awkward to be around. And there's guys like that in every scene, but I feel very lucky. I don't know. I feel like either guys in LA are just good actors and can hide that, or we all genuinely really are caring about what everybody's doing, because you sure see it, man, at gigs. You see it around this town. And there's, yeah, I guess respect. We all have a lot of respect for what everybody's doing, because we're in LA trying to do so many corners of entertainment and art and education. It's really a mecca in a lot of ways, man.
Yeah, and plus all the different styles of music on the guitar too, because like I love like everything, man. Like I'm just as happy to go hear someone play acoustic guitar or rock guitar or whatever. It's like there's just so many different genres, and we can appreciate all of it. And I mean, every instrument you can have different genres, but man, the guitar really, you can just do anything on the guitar.
Yeah, man. And also, like, speaking more about scenes, was Miami like this in the 1990s and 80s and stuff? Because you were in Miami again. Well, you're from Florida,
I'm from
right?
Florida. Yeah, yeah.
So I think I hear about guys talking about Miami back when Jocko and Matheny and stuff were in Miami, and of course Joe DiOrio, who we both studied with a little. You studied with Joe a little bit too,
I
right?
studied with his teacher for 9 years.
Vincent, what was his
Vincent
name?
Breedice.
Bredice, is that
Yeah,
his?
Breedice. Yeah.
And he wrote a bunch of books for Mel Bay, I remember, right?
Yes, he was like he was one of the early authors for Mel Bay, because I mean there was the original Mel Bay books, and Vince wrote a series of books with Mel Bay, and he was most I think his heyday was like the 50s and 60s and 70s, and when I studied with him like in the mid 80s and into the 90s, he was like near the end of his career, but
Right.
which I'm kind of lucky because he was really, really tough. There was all these stories of him hitting students and throwing their guitars on the floor. He was really a tough guy, but he was tough on us, but he wasn't hitting anybody. Thank God.
Well, it's a different
Yeah.
generation altogether,
Yeah.
because my grandfather's generation they were tough on people.
Yeah.
It was like Grant Green's biography. Greg Green, his son, talks about Grant coming in the room and hearing him practice a little guitar, and Grant saying, "You sound like crap."
Yeah.
And the reason that he said that wasn't to be a jerk, really. It was that he thought his son would either practice and get harder and get better, or he'd give up because of that, because he said that to him. So
Yeah.
it was like either way. And that old school mentality of like beat it into them, and either they're going to quit or they'll get better, and either way is the right way for them.
And that's what happened with Vince's students. He either made you quit or made you very good. There was no in between.
Yeah.
And I almost practiced out of fear, but the thing is, he would beat you up for like the way he would do his lessons. He would do it in groups,
Right.
like 3 or 4 students, and the lessons would be like 2-3 hours. So it was really cool. You do a group, and you'd spend an hour on scales and arpeggios, and then an hour playing tunes together, and then he would make you do like a chord melody, and everyone would do one, and you critique each other, things like that. And he would just really beat you up, but then at the end, he would say, Do you know how much talent you have? You could be the greatest guitar player in the world. And you walk out of there going, wow, like, you'd be so inspired.
Yeah.
And to this day, if I don't practice for a couple days, his voice is in my head going, he'd call you a bum.
And then
He'd say, you're not practicing, you bum. And I'm like, oh, I got to get
And
back.
then in today's education system, if you said that at the college level, a student would go complain and you get fired for saying that. It's
Mhm.
funny. It's just it's all evolved, and we have to, we have to get creative. I feel fortunate too, Dwayne. I studied with some guys like this too.
Yeah. Who
I
you study
also
with?
well, I studied with in Oregon, where I grew up. I had a classical guitar teacher who I studied with from when I was about 5 years old until I was 13.
Mhm.
And
Long time.
Chris was a gentle, super sweet guy, kind of a Mr. Rogers type of dude. And
Mhm.
his house was just a little apartment full up to the ceiling of classical guitar records. And he just lived kind of as a hermit and was like a Ted Green kind of guy.
Yeah.
He didn't really do much other than teach some guitar lessons.
And you
And
play all day.
Chris was very welcoming to me, and I was a kid. I was in love with the guitar from age about 3 or 4. I wanted to play it, and my mom was a music teacher, so she had a lot of music on in the house that got me wanting to do this,
Yeah.
And yeah, and then when I was 13, Chris and I kind of split. My parents divorced, and my mom moved on with me, and she started getting me hip to some jazz guys. And I was getting really into jazz because there were opportunities to play it in high school and middle school in the jazz band.
Yeah.
And I studied in Oregon. I studied with Dan Ballmer from Portland, really great guitar
Will
player.
study with him?
Yeah, Will studied with him too. Yep.
You guys
Dan was
both
my,
from Portland. That's wild.
yeah, I don't consider myself from Portland. I consider myself more from Central Oregon, actually, from
Oh,
Bend.
okay. Okay.
I went to high school in Portland, though. I lived in Portland for 2 years. Right around 9/11 was when I graduated high school.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I studied. My mom and I actually moved to Portland so that I could study with better jazz players and go to a high school that had a better jazz band and just more. Plus, a lot of the kids I was meeting at the jazz camp every summer were from Portland, so I was jamming with them. I was hanging with them on the weekends. Total jazz geek nerd.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, Balmer was my main teacher, and then there was another guy I studied with off and on by the name of Mike Denny, who teaches at University of Oregon in Eugene. And
Mhm.
Mike was a great teacher early on because he was very rigid with me as a kid about this is jazz guitar, this isn't jazz guitar. Now, it's like
Mhm.
we don't I don't believe in that teaching philosophy as much, but he
Yeah.
was one of the kinds of teachers that was like you've got to first listen to Charlie Christian and then you listen to Grant Green and Kenny Burrell and Tal Farlow. Don't even bother listening to Metheny and Schofield until you've really checked these guys out. And I
Wow.
got that in my head early on.
That's how my teacher was.
Yep.
Charlie Christian, Django, Cal Farlow. And my teacher would Vince would bring all these guys in for workshops. So he would bring because we lived in Miami, and so the New Yorkers would come down. We had Cal Farlow, we had Diorio many times.
Wow.
We had Jack Wilkins,
Mm-hmm.
who's a great guitar player that nobody ever talks about.
Yep.
You know Jack Wilkins at all?
Yeah, actually was going to study with him at Manhattan School of Music out of high
Yeah.
school. That
He
was my
was
second choice next to USC was MSM. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that was same kind of situation. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, dude. And yeah, it's so interesting like that lineage, those guys, those players and that teaching style. So I remember asking Mike at the end of one of the jazz camps, I said, Mike, where's a great place for me to go to college to study guitar? And he said, definitely USC. And I was like, oh, University of South Carolina. And he's like, no, USC in Los Angeles. And I asked my mom about USC because she lived in LA in the 70s and worked for the Disney Corporation. And she was like, oh yeah, USC it's a big school and it's a private school. And I was starting to think like, okay, that sounds like the right place. And then I looked online under the studio guitar department and I saw this guy, Joe Diorio, and I went on, this was been probably about the year 2000. I went on Joe's website that a student had built for him. And I was just so floored. I was like, what did I just discover, man? I have got to go study with this guy.
he is so unique, man. I mean, people in LA know who he is, and me being a Breedeye student, Diorio was like, I mean, that was his shining student. So
Oh
we
yeah.
would study all of his books, Fusion, Intervallic Designs, and Diorio was we would do all of those like kind of etudes where he'd write solos for like Blue Bossa and stuff. And man, yeah, Diorio was a big part of my upbringing as well. And man, all that intervallic stuff that he did, and oh, just fantastic. He was so great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did
I
he?
mean,
So did you study with him privately, or
mhm.
what was
Yeah.
that like? Tell me about that.
Well, I had to kind of warm up to it. You know, I moved down here, started SC, and I was lucky to study with Frank Potenza and a little bit of Pat Kelly. And then I got right into Joe's studio my junior year, and or yeah, and then I studied with Joe, and then he had his stroke that later that year.
Okay.
And when he had the stroke, it was right almost at the end of the semester. It was like kind of middle of April, end of April. And so the rest of the year fizzled out, and we all didn't know what was going to go down. Came back that fall. I'd been in touch with Joe and Tina, and I'd visited with him a lot and gone out to Brea and had dinner with him. And he was coming back slowly. And I think they were trying to figure out if he was going to come back and teach in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And they got Anthony Wilson and Larry Kuntz to fill in for the guys that were in Joe's
Yeah.
class. You know, Joe was teaching the 558 class at the time, which was so gold, man. We would go, it would Friday at like 4 o'clock in 101. We'd go in there, and here I am, a freshman, and Perry was there, a couple, and we would go in and just hang out. And it was all the graduate students. And Joe would sit there, and like a couple guys would kind of play something. And about 20 minutes in, Joe would be like, I'm hungry. Let's walk over to the University Village and have dinner. So we'd walk over to the little Italian buffet that was there at UV and just sit there. And Joe would tell stories about Pat Metheny. We just, it was, I mean, I was in heaven, man. It was so great. And then, but anyway, Anthony and Larry filled in for him that fall. And
No.
then they were trying to figure out, I think I don't know this for sure. I think that they kind of informally offered the gig to either of them if Joe didn't come back. Turned out Joe wasn't going to come back. He just didn't get the strength to play. And so Anthony and Larry couldn't do it. So Bruce came in too.
Mhm.
And then I studied with Bruce. So I was pretty lucky. I got to study with Frank and Pat, and Pat was the guy that really helped New West Guitar Group get off the ground.
Yeah.
And then I went right into studying with Diorio, and then I studied with Joe for 3.5 semesters, almost 2 years. He had the stroke at the end of that fourth semester. And then I studied with Anthony Wilson I actually because I always thought I might do my grad work at Cal Arts and would get an opportunity to study with Larry there. So I was like, very rare opportunity to get to study regularly with Anthony. And so I was like, I want to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And I actually kind of studied more composition with him more than guitar playing. We talked about writing tunes. And that was the semester I was in the Monk competition,
Mm-hmm.
2005.
Right.
And then that spring, Bruce was such a great guy to have my spring semester senior year, because old school kind of teacher. He just kicked my ass. And every lesson he would be like, you really need to get this together. You really need to get this together. And
Wow.
he pointed out a lot of holes that
That's a good
even
teacher.
through studying with those guys, that I'd kind of skipped.
Mhm.
That was, and then I graduated SC in '06. So
Wow.
that was my lineage of my formal jazz guitar education at that
That's a hell
point.
of an education, man.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
great.
lucky. I feel
Yeah.
very lucky. And it was such a great time at USC. It is now. It's always been a great time at SC, but that was still when the studio guitar department was accessible to the undergrads. It isn't anymore now. It's just a graduate exclusive program.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it just seemed like, again, talking about camaraderie, there was such a fraternity then, man. I was just Donovan Raitt was there, Charles Altura,
Wow.
Brady Cohen, Brian Green, Ryan Lehrman, me, Perry, Matt Roberts, now Matt Hayes. It was just Ian Robbins.
A lot
I
of
mean,
great players.
yeah, the list goes on and on and on. And I mean, there was a lot of high level guitar studying going on. And you know, it was 2006 was the year before YouTube was invented. iTunes had just come out in 2004. The
Mhm,
whole industry was also changing, and you got this sense that guys kind of came into that program feeling like, okay, we're going to compete for big major touring pop gigs and record deals.
mhm.
And then you got the sense leaving like, oh shit, I'm going to have to figure out a way to market myself on the internet. You know,
Right.
Facebook didn't even have all these features it has now. Facebook was just a profile picture and some text. There was no photos or videos yet.
Yeah.
Again, because YouTube didn't start until 2007. So it was fascinating to go to I'm so glad I got to go to music college before the internet apocalypse, because I imagine those classes now being dominated by the discussion of how to get yourself exposure and how to get yourself market yourself in these ways, you know.
Yeah, and you grew up into that because it's so interesting because I'm older and when all this revolution happened, I was someone who had already been playing for a while and had started my career, and then the world kind of shifted. And a lot of guys my age were just like, what do we do now? Like,
Yeah,
what's happening here? you know
yeah,
and I'm still, I've done my best to try to acclimate to all this stuff, but man, it's like a totally what when I grew up, it was like you get, we all wanted to be stars or whatever, but get a record deal and do this and that, and that whole thing is over. It's a whole different paradigm right now, and
yeah,
it's pretty wild.
yeah. It's a lot of it is all been, it's always been about the same thing. The thing I find interesting, Dwayne, is that we've gone from the era of, let's say, Robert Johnson through Hendrix, of guitar legend,
Mhm.
to the 70s and 80s and 90s Van Halen, you know, all these guys that got pop really superstar famous,
Yeah,
superstar, Taylor Swift level famous.
yeah,
And those guys are guitar heroes.
yeah,
Now we have, like, I don't know, guitar show offs or something.
yeah,
And like, the word show off has such a negative connotation to it because it means that you're just trying to kind of like throw out there, like just throw your stuff on a screen.
yeah,
But it is pretty cool how every day so much content's put up there, and it really it pushes us all to be like, wow, that guy sounds good. Okay, I'm going to try something. Okay, that guy sounds good.
yeah,
It's a different kind of community.
yeah,
And back then, as you know, from that era, man, and I got a taste of this too as a kid from the 90s. You know, you wouldn't know if Van Halen, or even, let's talk about, even John Mayer might be kind of the most current. I would consider him still a guitar hero because he's such a burning guitar player and got to be so famous as a
yeah,
singer and guitar player.
yeah,
Um, but you wouldn't really know if Mayer was coming out with a new record until maybe 6 months before the date. Like, you'd finally see it at Tower Records, John Mayer's new album coming out, or you'd
yeah.
hear a buzz in Rolling Stone or something. And then the record would come out and you'd go buy the record and you listen to it and be like, oh, I love it. Well, now there's no mystery anymore
Just
because you
shows
see
up.
what people are working on. And
Yeah.
that's changed this idea of the guitar hero and the guitar legend
Hmm.
too. I kind of wonder if that's going to ever come back. I mean, the other thing about guitar legend is this idea of, like, what happened with Pat Martino. He had to reteach himself how to play guitar. So he's
Yeah,
like this godly figure. And I know there's some truth to that, but
yeah,
that's been played in his story. Or Wes Montgomery played with the thumb and he's this
yeah,
magical guitar player.
yeah,
Robert Johnson sold his soul at the crossroads.
yeah,
So it's like, those are the legends, and it's this like godly mystery.
yeah,
And versus a hero is like Sylvester Stallone in Rambo with the Browning M50 firing
yeah,
off around a cannon fire, is like Van Halen tapping and playing all of this stuff and being like this
yeah.
crazy guitar player, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
it was coming up with something so new because when Eruption hit, 78, I was alive, but I was a really little kid. But when I would talk to older guitar players, I don't know if this happens anymore, where like people heard that, Eruption, the other songs on the first record, and this is from an era where it was all like Led Zeppelin and 70s blues rock guitar, post Hendrix. And when Eddie came out, people didn't even know if it was a guitar. Like they heard Eruption, they were like, what is that? Like they didn't even understand what it was. It was so mind-boggling that it influenced an entire generation of guitar. And we haven't had that since Eddie, really, because like John Mayer's a good player, but he didn't redefine the guitar. He's playing like Stevie and that kind of
Mhm.
thing. And even someone like Slash, like he didn't redefine the guitar. He's playing 70s blues rock in the 90s or late 80s. But Eddie like completely changed everything,
Mhm.
everything. And we haven't had that since then. I can't think of you could Tom Morello does some cool stuff with Rage Against the Machine with the technique and the scratching and the guitar. All
Yeah.
that's cool, but not like Eddie. Like because Eddie was the reason why I picked up a guitar. When I was a little kid, I was listening to Heat. You ever heard of the show Hee Haw?
Mhm. Oh, love it with Roy
Yeah.
Clark. Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. So that was my parents were not musicians. They were just regular people who listened to a lot of good music. But from what they told me, I was obsessed with Hee Haw. I would jump up and down and watch the show and everything. But, and then my parents listened to great music. They listened to like, the Beatles and Hendrix and the Stones and all that. And as a kid, I was like, okay, that's cool. But Eddie appealed to me because he was my music. It was a different thing. It was from my generation.
Mhm.
And man, when I heard him, it was like I saw a light. I was like, I have to play guitar. And I was a rock metal guy at first, and then later on I got into jazz. But man, Eddie just changed the world. He was just
Yeah, and now that happens on a microcosm because what would maybe happen now at that same age would be that you'd get interested in guitar, step one, then you'd be flipping around on Instagram and you'd find another young guy maybe about your age who's just playing at a really high level.
yeah.
And you're like, wow, I really want to learn how to do that. And
Mhm.
either you believe in yourself that you could do it or you wouldn't do it. And so it's like I wonder about talking to kids who are really young today in 30 years if they're going to say, yeah, this one Instagram video I saw really got me into guitar,
Yeah.
compared to, like, for me, it was definitely going to, I bought CDs at Borders and Barnes and Noble in
Me too.
1998, 99, 2000.
Right.
That's when I kind of became woke with jazz. And I was checking out, I was lucky Borders carried Crisscross, Talark, a lot of the kind of boutique jazz labels from the Midwest and East Coast.
Mhm.
And I was checking out guys like Peter Bernstein and Jesse Van Ruler and Mark
I love
Whitfield. I
him.
was like, man, this is where I want to, this is the direction I need to go in. I need to find, that's the kind of record I want to put out. And I guess the equivalent of that today would be me seeing those guys post a post on Instagram, you know,
Yeah.
I guess.
Now, how did you said your mom got you into jazz? Who was like your first jazz guitar player that you really identified with?
Yeah, so my mom, um, I was so lucky, man. My mom grew up playing piano and taught K5 music for 30 years.
Okay.
And when I got the seat in my jazz band in 6th grade in Bend, Oregon, High Desert Middle School, um, I went to the band director and I said, hey, can I get the bass audition? I want to audition on bass. And she's like, why do you want to audition on bass? You're a guitar player. She knew I was a guitarist, the band director.
Yeah.
Said, oh, there's guitar in the jazz band.
Yeah.
And
You
she's
didn't
like,
know.
well, yes, but I've never had a guitarist in the jazz band because I've never had a guitar player who can read. And I know you can read notes.
Right.
Why don't you audition on guitar? I'd love to have you audition. She knew I was going to be in there, but so the school had a Fender Strat standard, black Fender American Strat with a rosewood fretboard, a real one,
Yeah.
not a Mexico made one, a real one,
Right.
and a Fender Deluxe 112,
Nice.
solid state.
I had
And
one of those.
yeah, man. And I took that home that summer, and boy, I was whistling Dixie all the way home from school that day. I got this electric guitar and amp. I was like, man, I am so excited. And first thing I said, hey, Mom, do you have any recordings of jazz guitar? Because I'm going to play jazz guitar. And she had George Benson Tenderly.
Oh, that's the straight ahead record.
Yeah, with the
That's a great
strings.
record.
Yep. And also Jim Hall Concerto.
Oh, nice.
And she said, yeah, here's jazz guitar. So there I go listening to this stuff. And I'm like, I have no idea how to play guitar like this.
Did you like it or did you not get it at
I,
first?
I liked it, but I didn't really get it. I didn't have, and then I was kind of still studying with the classical teacher. And I think I went to him and he said, oh yeah, here's some chords you're going to need to play. So I went back that fall, and I remember fondly my father picking me up from summer camp, which I went to like dude, like the summer camp of all summer camp.
Uh,
Those kids and I, we were out there in canoes on this lake shooting archery, and just like it was summer camp. And he
that
picked
sounds
me up,
beautiful.
yeah, up in Oregon, Central Oregon, and Big Lake Youth Camp. And he picked me up from Big Lake, and he said, "Well, Mom's saying maybe next summer you should do a music camp."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I'm kind of liking this archery canoe business, you know."
It's pretty cool.
And he was like, "Well, I don't know. Maybe you should do a music one, you know." And so anyway, I I kind of thought about that. I started in seventh grade playing in the jazz band, and I put a capo on the third fret on that strat, and I'd play a G chord for B flat, a C
Yeah.
chord for E flat, and a D7 for F7. All the middle school jazz band charts were all in the key of F, B
Flat.
flat,
Yeah.
maybe E flat. So I
Yeah.
could get away with playing open chords on this strat, and I couldn't
Yeah.
play below the third fret, you know.
That's
And
fun.
I would take solos and stuff. So summer comes around, you know, and my mom signs me up for the U of O summer jazz camp, and I'd not really listened to the George Benson or Jim Hall album. I just kind of, I don't know, I didn't really get it yet. I went
Yeah.
to the jazz camp, and then I heard the first day I heard the guitar teacher Mike Denny play Stella by Starlight, and I was like, that's the track that's on the George Benson record.
I learned that solo when that record came out.
Me too, man.
Great
Oh,
solo.
love that solo.
Yep.
Gosh, I wish I could hear the alternate takes from that.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could hear. I know he took 3 or 4 more like that,
I'm
you
sure
know.
you did.
But anyway, so I heard it, and then it was like a lightning bolt hit me. I was like, "Oh, I get it. There's these tunes."
Mm-hmm.
And then guys learn the songs and they learn the chords, and then they can kind of improvise over the chords. Wow, that's what George Benson is doing. I listened to that George Benson CD. I actually think I didn't realize you could wear CDs out. And I had a Sony boombox that had probably a pretty powerful laser in it because it was a crummy boombox CD
Yeah.
player with the shock protection.
Yeah.
I think I wore out that CD because it started skipping all the time, and it
Yeah.
scratched a little bit,
Yeah.
and I just was so hooked. And then I heard Grant Green also at that jazz camp. I heard the Latin bit, which has Mambo In on it.
I jammed with that record last night. I
Really?
love that record. Love that record.
Yeah.
What a
It's
great record.
yeah, and well, on George Benson Tenderly, he does Mambo In on
Right.
that record.
Yeah.
Then it hit me again like a lightning bolt. I was like, okay, George listened to Grant Green,
Yes.
and I'm listening to George Benson. Now, I don't know if I'll ever get as good as these guys, but at least I can try to follow this line.
Sure.
Like, my job now is to learn the solos that George did and learn the solos that Grant did. If I can do that, I'll be able to figure out how to play these songs
Right. Right.
and how to improvise. And then I was like, I need a hollow body. And so I just was like desperately trying to get one. My mom and I were pretty poor, and she bought me this, Epiphone Casino right
Okay.
here.
That's a cool guitar. Yeah.
Very cool guitar.
Yeah.
Fully hollow, P90s, $600 at Musician's Friend in Eugene, Oregon, which is now Guitar Center.
Yeah.
Back when it was Musician's Friend.
Yeah.
And man,
Still got it. Good for you. That's awesome.
That was it, dude. And then I took it real serious in high school and just totally drank the Kool-Aid, shaved the haircut, joined the cult, and then so I had a funny lineage with jazz. Like, I listened to a lot of folk music as a kid, and in 94, 95, when I was in elementary school, my buddies were listening to Nirvana, but I could care less. I was listening to John Denver and Peter, Paul and Mary and
Wow.
because I love acoustic. I love this sound of the acoustic guitar.
Me too.
I didn't really like Nirvana because I didn't hear, at least then, I didn't really hear like a steel string on there.
Yeah.
And I listened to a lot of country music too, a lot of pop country of the day. Clint Black, Trisha Yearwood. I was listening.
That just blows me away because I was already in college when that was happening. Makes me feel old.
Yeah,
You know?
man. Well, it's It's just, yeah, it's a generational thing. We're all old now, Dwayne.
Yeah, I know. I know. I don't. I try not to think too much about being old, but it just happens.
Did you, and then so you were studying jazz as a teenager too in
Yeah.
Florida then, right? And then
Yeah.
you went on and played rock after that, or did you go deeper into jazz and move to New York?
Well, so my situation was, so as a kid, I was a metalhead. I was really into metal and Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads and all that stuff. And my uncle was a guitar player, and he came over one day and he saw the posters in my room, and I got into some pretty bad, crappy metal at that
Right,
point. I was very young. I didn't know any better. And he looked at me. He says, "Man, you need some better music." So he
right.
came a week later with this tape that I still have. I found in a box the other day called "Various Guitarists," and it had he was a fusion guy. He was not into jazz at all. He didn't like Jim Hall or any of that stuff. But
Uh-huh.
he made me a tape of like Larry Carlton, Larry Coryell, Alan Holdsworth, all that kind of stuff. Jeff Beck. And I listened to the tape, and the first time I heard it, I didn't like it. I didn't get it. I didn't understand what it was. But I
Right.
kept listening to it, and it started to grab hold of me, and I started to get it. So I definitely went through the fusion bridge. And the good thing about I was always a very inquisitive kid, and my mom, she would always take me to the library. She loved taking me to the library to look at books. She's like, "Let's go get some books." So I started to get into jazz. I didn't know anything about jazz. My parents didn't listen to jazz, so I knew nothing. And I would get all these books on jazz, and by this point, I was already listening to like McLaughlin and all this stuff. So then I would read these books, and then they would talk about fusion, like McLaughlin and Al Di Meola and all this stuff. And everybody kept talking about Miles and Coltrane. So, I did my research and that, and I started to finally get exposed to straight ahead jazz. And once I heard straight ahead jazz, that was it for me. Because I liked fusion. I still like fusion, but man, when I heard straight ahead jazz, I don't know what it was, but there was just something about it that just clicked with me. And the first record I ever bought was, I remember my friend Monty and I in high school, we were both rockers getting into jazz. And we said, let's go to the record store and buy some jazz records. And we kind of knew what we wanted. So he bought Miles Davis Four and More, which is like a masterpiece. And I bought Herbie Hancock Empire Isles. And I was like hooked, and we of course the big thing back then was you would always record your friends' records.
Yeah, on
We didn't
cassette.
have the internet didn't even exist,
Yeah.
so you would make tapes. So anytime you'd go out with three of your friends, you'd buy a record, and then everybody would record each other's record.
Right.
And I quickly going, with what so I started getting into jazz. I had a very good rock teacher named Mike Corbin in Fort Lauderdale. Great guy, taught me how to read music, taught me scales and theory, showed me all the rock I ever wanted to know. But once I got into jazz, I kind of realized that he's not really a jazz player. And then my friend studied with Breed Ice. He says, "You need to come with me." So the first lesson, I go and play for this Breed Ice guy. And I was kind of a hot shot rock guitar player as a kid. I was pretty good. I could play all the Halen stuff. Not like Eddie, but I could do it. And I played for this guy, and all I had ever heard, people just kept telling me, "Oh, you're so good, blah, blah, blah." So I had probably an ego, and I played for this Breed Ice guy, and he basically just said, "Man, you can't play at all. You need help." And it blew my mind. No one had ever talked to me like that. And instead of saying, "Screw you, I'm out of here," I left there going, I have to study with this guy.
Yep.
If he's telling me I can't play and I suck, I have to study with him then. you know? And he hated rock, hated it. Thought it was like the devil's music, that's how old he
Right.
was. And
Yep.
he got me into Joe Pass, Wes Montgomery, Django Reinhardt, Charlie Christian, all the classic guys. And I fell in love with it right away. I just loved it. And that's where it all started, with
Yeah.
Vince and we all got into it, Tal Farlow, all that stuff.
Yeah, man.
Wow.
Yeah, and it just goes to show you so much of how we develop. Of course, it's environmental in that way too, and we get pulled and pushed in different directions. Sometimes it is a teacher. A lot of times it's our friends, the records they're listening to.
Sure.
I guess my personality early on was that I didn't really care that all my friends around me didn't listen to jazz. I felt like growing up in rural Oregon, listening to a jazz record was like in Alice in Wonderland, looking through that keyhole into this room, into this big space. I was like, I've got to get in there. Like,
You're
this is
probably the only one, right?
yeah, I was like, man, I'm the only guy that really can look into this room and see this. I got to go investigate this some more.
Hmm.
And the key to unlocking that door is becoming a better guitar player, because if I'm playing at a high level, other musicians are going to kind of come in proximity to me, or I'm going to have an easier time asking a guy for a lesson if I know my shit ahead of time and know the scales already, that the lesson isn't about learning scales. The lesson is about how to improvise.
And your
Um,
teachers got you into all the basics like that, scales and arpeggios, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky. The summer jazz camps I went to at University of Oregon and the Brit Festival and the Mel Brown camp at Western Oregon University, it was like a week. Like in 1 week, I felt like I learned in 1 week more than I learned all school year in all 8 periods of high school.
Wow.
It was intense. It was so intense. And I would practice for the weeks leading up to camp. And then I would practice the weeks after camp, getting into the school year. I set all sorts of deadlines for myself. It was just, man, I mean, and then when I got to college, I remember thinking, okay, keep that kind of knowledge influx, that flow, keep that coming. Even if school isn't giving it to you, if it starts feeling like high school again, channel how it felt to go to those workshops for a week and just get so much out of each week in college.
Yeah.
And you know, I guess that's why college went by like that, because I felt like at USC, I mean, the 4 years I was at USC, our football team didn't lose a single game at home. We had Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart. It
Oh
was
my
the years
God.
we
That was
won 2 national championships. I
wow.
I was at the Coliseum for one game, and that one game was seeing Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart score pretty much themselves, score against UCLA like 56-0. It was just like, it was crazy. And every game, everyone wanted to beat us. Well, I went to one of them and I was like, man, this is so cool. I'm so bummed to be missing this. I need to be back in the practice room, you know?
Yeah.
And while you'd hear everybody tailgating on the USC campus, and meanwhile, there I was doing my work study gig, opening up the practice rooms, and then I would shed because my shift was 10 a.m. to about 6 p.m. on Saturdays was my work study. So I was getting paid my work study to unlock the practice rooms, check out practice rooms, and practice in the practice rooms.
Can't
And
beat
I shedded and transcribed and shedded and transcribed and shedded and transcribed.
That's the secret, man. And you know, the transcribing really is the key, because that was the one thing with Vince, is that he was a fundamentals guy. He was all about scales, arpeggios, reading, theory. And that was the one area that I felt like going into college. To this day, I knew my neck inside out by the time I even started college. Every scale, every mode, every key, everywhere. I wasn't a great jazz player, you know, because he didn't talk much about transcribing. Like we would read out of the Omni book and I would listen to a lot of jazz, but I didn't transcribe much yet. And he had talked about that, like you should do it. And I was kind of getting into it. Then when I started going to college, I started to play with people and I wasn't very good at playing jazz. I knew tunes. He made
Yeah.
me learn tunes. I could play tunes by memory, a lot of them, but my improvisation wasn't that great. I don't feel like I had a good time feel and all that kind of stuff. And people would tell me, they're like, "You're not happening." And I was like,
Isn't
"Wow,
that great though?
yeah,
That's so great when people say that, you
yeah,
know?
yeah." Well, that's how it was back then. You can't do that anymore. You
And
know?
I talked to Joe Bag a lot about that, man, how him and Alan Ferber, all those guys would have this rating system where they'd be like, sounded okay, sounded good, sounded great, sounded really nice.
Yeah,
And like this was code so that they'd get off the bandstand and be like, yeah, man, you sounded good tonight, or you sounded really nice.
yeah,
And Matt Otto, that whole
sure,
I'm lucky. I mean, Joe, I've gotten to work a lot with Joe. I know you have too. You recorded a
sure,
record with him, right, in
yeah,
2013?
something like that. I can't remember. It was a while ago.
Yeah.
I'm due for another record, that's for sure.
Yeah, man. As a trio record with organ.
Yeah, I did. That was the one I did with him. That was a lot of the music that I went to UCI and got my master's,
Right.
and that was a great experience. It was an interesting experience because it was a very very small program, and it was
Yeah,
with
at
Dan
UCI.
Coffey. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that it's a long story how I got in there, but everything. But originally, I wanted to get my master's degree, and contacted Kay because at that time I was married and had a kid and had a house, and I would have loved to have gone to USC or something like that, but I needed to be close because I couldn't spend 5 hours a day in traffic or whatever it was. UCI was close, and Kay had said, I had contacted him, and he said, "Well, we can't really help you. We don't really have a jazz guitar teacher here." And I kind of said, "Good. I don't want a guitar teacher. I've always had guitar teachers." And he says, "Well, give me a CD." I gave him my CD, and then he got back in touch with me. He goes, "Okay, you don't need a guitar teacher. You're going to study with me." And I was like, that's what I want. I want to study with a piano player. I don't want to study with a guitar teacher because, you study with guitar too much, it's all the same shit. So this way I'm like, okay, I'm going to study with a guy who plays incredible jazz piano. And that opened up a lot. And he made me write a lot of music. So that degree was just a jazz performance degree, but it really should have been a composition degree because he just made me write. My thesis, I didn't even have a thesis. It was like, you're going to write all the music for your recital.
Yeah.
And then I wrote all that music, and then I did the CD with a lot of those tunes, and I don't know what that has to do with the CD, but
No, no, no.
all the
Yeah. So
original music.
that was kind of around that time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there any, so you did your master's in 2007, 8, 9, you were saying
Yes.
something like
Yes.
that? Yeah. So and then you would have done your undergraduate, finished that up in the late 90s then?
96. So there's a long
96.
stretch in between. Yeah.
Yeah. So you took over 10 years off. And
Yeah.
I took 5 years well, let's see, I graduated 06. I took 4 years off.
Yeah.
And aren't you glad? I feel like for some of my students, I always tell them this, like, having all that time between those 2 degrees is vital. It's key. You have to get out there in the field. You've got to do stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess in one way it would have been cool if I would have just pressed through. Like 2007 and 8 and 9 were kind of the apex or the beginning of the Great Recession. I could have very well stayed at USC.
That's what happened to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I could have just stayed at SC, but I got out there and started trying to gig, and man, I was doing $75 gigs all
Yeah.
the way down in deep Orange County and living in Echo Park and living in
Yeah.
Long Beach. And I was driving a 97 Ford Escort with 150,000 miles on it.
Yeah.
I'm glad I had that experience. Had I stayed in school, it would have been a much more comfortable 2 years right then. But then I did my master's 2010 to 2012, and it gave me more time to think about Cal Arts as being the place to go do it.
Yeah.
And I really wanted an MFA because back then an MFA was still kind of considered a terminal degree in jazz. Now, of
Yeah.
course, the doctorate really is.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, if I get an MFA, it'll allow me to be competitive for jobs that are a doctorate required. And it might still be the case, but I think mostly now it's pretty much presumed you're going to get a doctorate if you're going to teach full time now.
When you say so, the MFA was more preferred than the Master of Music.
Yeah, an MFA up in
That's what I have too.
Yeah, through the 2010s, up until about 2010, I was actually just reading an article about this because I was just kind of recently been going over my resume, my CV,
Yeah.
and the Master of Fine Arts was really considered in dance, visual art, film. It has, and it still is in many ways. It's considered a terminal degree because there's many schools that it doesn't go past that. You don't get a doctorate in film in many cases, but as higher education's expanded, there are now doctorates and PhDs being offered in certain areas.
Yeah.
And music, I think, is certainly one of them that is expanded. The DMA opportunities have expanded. Now you can get a DMA at UNT, and back in the day, USC was the only place you could really get one for guitar, for jazz and classical guitar.
Yeah.
So now it's like I think it's changed a little bit, but there was certainly a time for a long time where in music an MFA was considered the terminal degree for contemporary guys like us. Not musicology. Musicology, it's always been PhD.
Yeah.
Music history, PhD.
Yeah.
And in classical music, I think probably since the early 2000s, there's been a lot of PhDs in a doctorate of musical arts.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted the MFA degree, and CalArts offered it. Plus Larry Kuntz was there and Charlie Hayden was still there.
Yeah.
I knew Charlie wasn't going to be teaching there a lot longer. I really wanted to get in there while I could.
See, I
And
want to talk to you about Charlie Hayden because that must have been unbelievable.
yeah,
I loved UCI. It's not, it doesn't have a huge reputation of being like a well-known music school, but man, I tell you, I really enjoyed it because it it was like Cal Arts in a lot of ways because I know Cal Arts is very forward thinking and very free form type of thing, and UCI was like that. K was like, if you know, K was not going to be the guy to ram standards down your throat. Like he was not the guy, and I didn't want that because I not that I'm mastered that whole thing, but I had already been gigging, and that's all I had ever done. I wanted someone that was going to teach me composition, and I had a lot of interest in free jazz and stuff. And UCI had a guy named Michael Desson there, who's a great trombonist and
mhm,
composer, and he's a
yes,
free improviser. And I took classes with him, and it was great, man, because it was like wide open, and I really enjoyed that. And there was a lot of great composers there, and I took composition classes, and so I was very happy to not be stuck with some jazz guitar player who's going to make me do chord melodies on Stella by Starlight. Like that's not what I wanted at all.
mhm.
And I bet Cal Arts was the same kind of situation, right? It was like wide open and kind of free.
Yeah, well, it's like I knew Larry pretty well going into the program, along with Joe LaBarbera. I've known Joe for almost 20 years because he met me when I was in high school and did the Port Townsend workshops. Um, I didn't know Reutzstein as much. I got to know him through the process of applying, and Larry introduced me to him, and then Charlie, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah, and Larry initially was just like, well, I'm not going to be able to teach you a lot. And I was like, dude, of course you are, man. I mean,
yeah,
and I think that's like a common thing. Every teacher at a graduate level tells all their students this.
I
It's like,
know.
man, you're already gigging, but the reality is getting that graduate piece, I certainly have found it to be really helpful for a lot of my teaching, and
Sure, you
plus
need it.
plus it was a time I wanted to learn again. I had been on the road a lot. I wanted to go back and learn again some stuff and stylistically get a little bit off of bebop for a couple years.
Mhm.
I worked with Miroslav Tadic there, who's a great Macedonian guitarist. We learned a lot of classical guitar, a lot of flamenco guitar playing.
Mhm.
But yeah, getting into the program, Larry was like, well, the cool thing about CalArts is that you'll really just get to do your thing. You'll get to um, choose the path you want to go for, and you can really pick what classes you want to take.
Mhm.
The only con at the time was just the price tag, and the fact that they don't have a big endowment to give full scholarships. And the Herb Alpert Foundation donated a lot of money to that school. The music school's named after Herb Alpert, just like UCLA's is. And Herb's given money to USC's. He's fun. LACC now, students can go there and get a free degree for 2 years thanks to Herb Alpert. You
Wow,
know,
that's great.
yeah, I mean, he's Herb Alpert is a saint,
Yeah,
in Los Angeles. How
yeah,
he's turned all that A&M money right back into guys like us, which
yeah,
is incredible.
yeah.
So I got a good scholarship to go there, but I had to pay out of pocket, and it was a tough call because I love USC, and I love Frank and Pat and Richard. All it was great studying there, and but then I knew, and I talked to Frank about it. I knew that like I had to maybe go somewhere else for that graduate piece and get another perspective and
Yeah.
switch it up. So CalArts was a good fit for me. And then there were things about it that were I was kind of like, oh, this is okay. I mean, I'm just kind of gonna do this.
Yeah.
But I was lucky. I got to really craft a lot of that degree around what I wanted to do at the time. And CalArts was incredibly sympathetic to me being on the road. And I was on the road a lot 2010 to 2012
Mhm.
with New West, Spencer Day, just getting started with Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah.
So I was busy, and they were cool with me missing final. Like one teacher was like, "Oh, you've got a tour. I'm just going to give you an A for the class."
Wow.
I was like, "Well, okay, you don't have to do that. Let me actually do the work." And
Yeah.
like I think I wrote 3 papers
Yeah.
for the whole master's degree, like three,
Oh
like four or
man.
5 page papers. Everything else was all playing, and
Yeah.
I took African dance, all that kind of stuff, you know.
See,
So
that sounds great because I actually wrote a lot in UCI, but it was kind of good for me because I'm a terrible writer. So I went from being a terrible writer to an adequate writer. So I learned something from it. But no, it was cool. I think it should be that way. I always felt like, if anyone had ever asked me to design a program for colleges, I always feel like your bachelor's degree should be focused on playing bebop and standards and being good at it. And maybe
mhm,
everything up to like modal era, like being able to do all that. And then when you do your masters, that's when you should be really pushed.
yeah.
Modern composition, free jazz, whatever,
Mhm.
maybe stuff that you're uncomfortable with. Maybe you leave there going, I don't know what that was all about, but you leave there exposed, thrown in
Yeah.
to new things. That's the time to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
That's what Cal Arts was like and UCI as well. I think that's good for all of us.
Yeah, UCI
Yeah.
is known for its classical stuff too, I know, right? A lot of great classical pianists have come out of that program and stuff.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
heavy department for that.
But what was cool that I liked was, I didn't get a lot of ensemble playing there because the program was so small. But the cool thing was K was like, he was very. I didn't like my undergrad experience. I wasn't that happy with it. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons, but when I was younger, I was very anti-authority. I didn't like school in general. I just wanted to get a piece of paper, and I did it, and I got out of there.
Yeah.
Um, but coming back to UCI later on, I was more mature. I was older, and I really wanted to learn. I wanted to be there. And Kay treated me with a lot of respect because I had been around a little bit, had done some things, and he didn't think of me as some kid who didn't know
Right.
anything. He was like, okay, you're a guy that's done some things, even though I was nowhere near him. But he told me, you're not playing with the undergrads. That's not going to happen.
That's
So
cool.
he
Yeah.
said, your ensemble. There was actually four of us in the master's program. There was a very good bass player named John Crooks. You know John Crooks?
It
He
sounds
was a
familiar.
very busy LA jazz bassist, and he just kind of dropped off the scene. I don't really know where he is, but he was there when I was there. And Kay was like, your ensemble is going to be you, me, and John Crooks. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. So I got to play with Kay for 2 years, and we did all kinds of cool stuff. So I was very fortunate that even though I didn't get all these different opportunities with all the different ensembles, I got to play with a great musician for 2 years.
Mhm.
And it was really cool. I really enjoyed the hell out of it. It was awesome.
Yeah, I think we all, it's funny, you talk to like a bunch of different players who've done grad school and everybody's experience is so different. Some guys are
Sure.
like, and other people are like, it was amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, you go into it and you're like, I really want to get that degree behind me so I can feel like I feel like I have a degree that matches the amount of hours and time I put into this. I mean, it's easy for a lot of us musicians to feel like that because we've spent so much time
Yeah.
crafting ourselves on the instrument. You
Yeah.
want to feel like you have a degree that matches that. And
Yeah.
so, whether ego aside, just the sheer amount of time we spend,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's nice. It is nice to have a master's in that. Yeah, I've spent probably since I was 5 years old, 10, 20,000 hours playing the guitar now. I don't know. It's kind of incalculable my whole life. I can't remember when I wasn't playing the guitar. It's
Not
just
to mention all the gigs and experiences you've done. Because I
yeah.
feel like I've learned as much as I've studied and practiced. I mean, God, I can't even all the gigs I've done. That's where I really learned how to play. Getting yelled at. The idea of you're comping, not playing bass notes in the chorus. Like my teacher didn't tell me that. That was the thing. Was as good as Breed Ice was, it was like basics and fundamentals, but it wasn't like real world gigging experience. I would
Oh
be bass
yeah,
players and say, "Dude, stop playing the root." And I was like,
yeah.
"What?" Like nobody told me that, and then they'd yell at me, and I stopped doing it. I figured it out.
Or just playing with drummers. I mean, I played with a lot of drummers at SC, but like my teachers, few guys in particular, like Larry wasn't like this, but some guys were like, I'd ask them questions about playing in rhythm sections, and they'd be like, "Oh, don't worry about that," or "Drummers play too loud," or and I was like, no, I want to really learn how to like play with a drummer and like what
Yeah.
to listen for and how to like both interact in a rhythm section without interfering with what the bass player and drummer are doing, you know.
Yeah.
And just telling me not to play bass notes isn't enough. I need to really learn how to do that. And that, yeah, that takes a lot of years of playing with musicians that you're not really locking in with to be like, oh, that's what it feels like to have that kind of tension. And that's all the stuff that can't be taught in school. I think back to Cal Arts a little bit, Charlie Hayden really tried to instill a lot of this
Yeah.
in his students. He taught a class called Spirituality of Improvisation.
Wow. What was that like?
And yeah, and it was, unfortunately, the semester I took it was his final semester he set foot on that campus before he got sick and had surgery and then went home and then was in hospice and then passed.
Wow.
This was all 2012 into 13.
Yeah.
Charlie, yeah, just like, I mean, it's like a god walking in a room, you know. I mean, it's
He's
Charlie Hayden,
heavy, man. Yeah.
but really like a very gentle guy who was very willing to talk about certain experiences. He would just want to share the experience of listening to music with us. So he brought in this cassette. It was a cassette tape of him with Lee Konitz and I think Brad Mehldau when he was like 16 years old.
Wow.
And Charlie told us a story about how this was the first time Brad Mehldau met Lee Konitz, and that Lee Konitz hated piano players, didn't like piano players. And Charlie was like, you got to listen to this one. He's different. And Lee was like, oh, he's a teenager. And the recording, they played some, I forget what tune it was. It was something really, really burning. And they played the tune for like, and there's a drummer on it. Charlie didn't mention who the drummer was. Might have been Paul Modian,
Wow.
because they were playing a lot. But it was at Charlie's house, and Brad had just kind of come out here to look at moving to LA. He was dropping out of high school or something. Lee Konitz, can you imagine? And they played, and the track went on for probably 45 minutes.
Oh my God.
Charlie is standing there in the classroom right next to the speaker, next to the little stereo, just like this. And we all were sitting there just like, you know, jaw drop. And every now and then he'd hit pause and he'd turn around and he'd like, did you guys just hear that? What he just played? And we're like, yeah, Charlie. Then he'd go back and he'd hit pause again and we'd sit there, and so much music was going on. There was so much stuff. Brad was just playing like all over the place. And so
Yeah.
was Konitz. You could tell they were on fire. And Charlie got done with the recording, and then he just kind of stood there for a minute. We were all just like blown away by this. And then he just kind of looked at us and he was just like, well, who wants to go get some lunch?
That was the lesson for the day.
And then one day I came in there and the recording with him and Keith had just been released. The one that had not been released, that they wouldn't release because they had a bit of a tiff, you know?
Yeah.
And then they ended up, I think Manfred Eicher probably pulled both of their arms and said, we got to release this. You know, so they released this record.
Yeah.
And they do For All We Know on there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're walking into class, and I see Charlie in the hallway, and I was like, man, Charlie, I just checked out the record with Keith, and it's so good. And my heart is racing as I'm talking to Keith, to Charlie about it. And he was kind of chuckling, and he's like, yeah, man. Yeah. You know, and I said, you know, you guys do For All We Know. You want to know something funny about that song? The guy that wrote Santa Claus Is Coming to Town wrote that song. And he started laughing, and he said, man, get your guitar. Let's go play that. So the only tune I ever played with Charlie Hayden was Santa Claus Is Coming to Town. And we played the tune for like 15, 20 minutes, and we improvised over it. Ba-do-ba-do-da, ba-ba-do-da. And it was like, I think spring. It was like March. And I remember the kids coming in, and they were like, what the hell is going on? Storie, why are you and Charlie playing Christmas music? And we get done, and Charlie was like, man, that guy's wrote some great songs. Man, the money he must have made on that song. And Charlie lit up about any good music. And
Wow.
yeah, and he was kind of in feeble shape in those classes, but I mean, like, it's always almost was too much. Like, you're just sitting there going like, man, this is somebody who you want to like try to hang out with and listen to every word that this guy says, and listen to how he plays his instrument.
See, I would have, you know what I would have done? I mean, I would have loved any contact with him at all, anything, but I would have loved to have picked his brain about the Ornette records and playing with Ornette. What was that like? And I love Ornette's music. I play with those records all the time, and I
Mhm.
don't know what the hell's going on. I try to keep up with it, but I would love to, I would have loved to have had a class with him and played those tunes and have him say, okay, think of this, do this, or whatever, just to see.
He
You know,
always, when the classes he was there, he had his bass. A student would bring in a bass for him. It might have been one of his basses he kept at the school.
mhm.
And anytime somebody would kind of ask a question, because the funny thing about the class was there were about 4 or 5 of us kind of heavier grad students in there. Adam Ratner was in the class with me too. You can
Oh,
ask Adam. You can ask Adam about
he's a
this.
great player. Yeah,
And then there were also some like random kids from the music department. Like there was a flute player and just like people that weren't jazz musicians that were in the
yeah,
class, that because CalArts, anybody can take really anything.
yeah.
So sometimes they would ask really funny questions, but it was really cool to see how Charlie would answer them. Like they'd be like, "So, did you guys make all this up, or is this all written out?" Charlie would just get his bass up and be like, "Boom, booby doo bop, bwee, ba 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 ba. How was your day? Ba 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 ba. It took a long time to get here. Bom, bom, ba 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 boom, ba boom, bop." And then that's how he would answer the question.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
you just, man, I just, again, it almost puts me in tears. It makes you think about a generation of musician that, like, I mean, they went all in, man. They went all in.
It's
They
amazing to spend
really went
time
all
with him
in.
like that. That's so great, man.
And when he had hangs with Ornette and those guys, they didn't probably talk very much. They were too busy making music. And I hope that's a lesson for all of us too. It's like, when we're collaborating with people, I think that we all, like, with digital recording and with how crazy recording has got, and like I'm totally inspired by my friends Genevieve and Lewis and Jacob Collier, all these guys. But and you can tell the devil's in the details with
Yeah,
what all of them are doing.
yeah,
But I think that Ornette and those guys would be like, yeah, the devil's in the moment,
yeah,
with us right here. This moment will never be the same. So let's just do this right now. And
yeah,
those guys were like, you wonder how critical they were together. But, especially you hear Paul Modian, him, Ornette, how those guys played together. And, I mean, you've heard, I mean, Matheny's Song X is an interesting record too.
oh, that's an incredible album. I love that album.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's actually it's funny. I bought that record when it first came out. I remember I was getting into jazz. I think it was like 86 maybe. And
Yeah.
that's when I was first getting into jazz, and I had gotten like Bright Side's Life and like Off Ramp. So both
Yep.
of those I fell
Yep.
in love with. And I
Yeah.
was on vacation up in like Connecticut seeing my family, and I bought Song X, and I didn't even know who Ornette Coleman was. I just knew that was like the new Matheny, and,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
heard it. I'm like, what the
What is
hell
this
is this?
stuff?
I
Yeah.
had no idea what it was. I didn't understand it, but there was something there. I was like, I don't know what this is, but I love it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
chaos. It's great.
Yeah, I wish, I got to hang with Matheny just once or twice actually, but once kind of we got to really talk to him and ask him questions at SC back in 2005.
Yeah,
Um, I asked him, actually, we talked a lot about like Diorio in Miami in the 70s and
yeah, oh,
Jocko.
yeah,
He had Pat just lit up like a Christmas tree when he talked about Joe Diorio.
yeah,
But I wish I would have asked him a little bit about Ornette's record. I wasn't as familiar with that at that time. I remember Pat talking a lot about Roy Haynes and how like he felt playing with Roy really elevated his playing, and that was a whole nother way to lock into the quarter note.
yeah. That's a great
But
record with Dave Hahn. I
oh
remember
my
when that
gosh,
came out. I bought it like the day it came out. I was like, this is unbelievable.
I give my students that record to listen to about how to lock into the ride cymbal, because you listen to the way Pat plays the eighth notes against the ride cymbal that Roy's
Mhm.
playing. It's it's it it's so perfect.
Yeah.
It's absolutely perfect, man. I mean, Pat, just goes without saying, he's so incredible. And speaking earlier about the questions, we were talking right at the beginning of this interview, bringing it
Mhm.
back to some of that stuff. We were talking about Van Halen doing something that you had never heard and
Yeah.
blowing you out of the water. Pat's mentioned this a bunch, and I remember Perry and I have talked about this. Pat said, um, at USC, he was like, yeah, there's 10 things people haven't done with guitar yet. And I'm not going to mention what they are, but I've been waiting for some young guys. He said this to us as students. He's like, because somebody asked, like, do you think we've done it all with guitar? Like, I
Not even
mean,
close.
what's next? And Pat was like, I know of 10 specific things nobody's done yet on the guitar on a popular level that would be like this. And just, it was interesting hearing him talk, because he obviously spoke from this chair of like, I know who I am, you know who I am, so
Yeah.
here is direct from the gospel of my resource.
Yeah.
So
I've
it's just,
I've got some Athene Miami stories, man.
oh really, did
I
you
met him
see
a
him
few
at that
times.
time?
What's that?
Did you see Pat in the 80s then? Was that
Oh
or was
man,
it 70s? This is 70s. Yeah.
I saw him on the Still Life Talking tour. Dude, talk about life changing. But
Yeah.
okay, I've seen him a few times. When I met Jocko, I talked about this on one of my other podcasts. I met Jocko, hung out with him. It was like,
Wow.
I was in the ninth grade. Right after he died, Matheny came and did a benefit for his family, and there was a hotel ballroom. I heard about it in the paper. I have no idea. It's funny all these things I was able to attend, and I don't even remember how the hell I found out about it. But he
Yeah.
came and did a concert to help raise money for Jocko's family.
Mm-hmm.
And he played trio with Peter Erskine, and I think it was Don Wilner, who was the bass teacher at University of Miami.
Mm-hmm.
And they played like All the Things You Are, Burning, which he always does, Bright
Mm-hmm.
Size Life, all this stuff. I was in the ninth grade. I'm watching this in this ballroom with like 100 people. I found the pictures the other day of like Peter Erskine covered in sweat
Yeah.
and Matheny, and he had his striped shirt still.
Yeah. So what year would have that been? Still Life Talking with 87?
87,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, and then in the early 90s when I was in college, this is a story that I've told a lot of my friends, but I have to tell it publicly because it's just such an amazing story. So when he was doing the album We Live Here,
Mm-hmm.
the early 90s,
Yeah.
he was hanging out on South Beach a lot, kind of getting a vibe for the whole scene. And it's back then, it was all like club culture, it was all DJs and dancing. And I used to go party there all the time because that's when South Beach, when I was a kid, South Beach was like Scarface.
Oh yeah.
You wouldn't go there.
Wouldn't
It
go
was all,
down there, right? Yeah.
but in the early 90s, it got revamped and it was beautiful. It was like
Like
back.
the movie The Birdcage, right?
Yes, that birdcage happened in the 90s, right? So
Right.
it became beautiful and there was all these clubs and there's beautiful women everywhere and I would go there with all my friends and we'd party on the weekends and it was a magical place. I mean, there was a live music scene, but it was a lot of DJ culture, which was cool too. So Matheny was hanging out. So I would go down there several times and we'd be driving down like Lincoln Road or Ocean Boulevard, whatever it is, and Matheny would be standing in the corner. And you're like, there's Matheny! And he did it for like a whole summer. He was just hanging out. So one of the nights was we were in college still, and I had just gotten into Bill Frisell. And Bill Frisell is absolutely one of my heroes. I saw you recently at the Bill Frisell show where he played 26-2, right?
Yeah.
Moss Theater. It was
Yeah. It's
incredible.
phenomenal. Yeah.
So um, I had already been listening to Frizzell with the Paul Motion Group, all those Broadway emotion records, which I absolutely love. And Charlie's on a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I already was a fan. So, but I was new. So Bill Frisell was doing a solo guitar concert in South Beach. So my friends and I, we heard about it. We bought tickets. We went. Of course, we're drinking before, we get in there. And we get there early and Bill's just in the corner, just hanging out. And I went and, hi, I'm such a big fan. He was, hi. You know, he's such a spacey cat, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So he goes up there and he's playing solo guitar, and he's playing all these loops and stuff, and he's playing like stuff like Days of Wine and Roses and all this, but with loops. And I had never heard anything like this, and it was like one of those. It was a life-changing concert. Like,
Mm.
I was so blown away by this. I don't know if you ever heard of a concert or music where your stomach's turning.
Oh
And I'm
yeah.
like, I can't take it anymore. I can't take it. It's too much. It was like that intense. Because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what to expect, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Now, also at that time, at the University of Miami, there was a great guitar program. There was lots of great musicians coming out of there. But at that time, everybody was a Matheny clone. Like in my generation, everybody was a Matheny clone. Everybody sounded like him, same sound, everything. Kind of like how everyone became Kurt Rosenwinkel clones at some point, right?
Yeah.
My era, it was Matheny clones.
Uh-huh.
And even though I've always loved Matheny, at that time I was against that. I'm like, I don't want to play like Matheny. I love Matheny, but I like Wes Montgomery, and now I'm into this new guy Frizzell. So I was kind of in my mind anti-Matheny a little bit, which of course was stupid. You know, I was
Mm-hmm.
young and dumb. So I'm in the front and we're drinking. I'm listening to Frizzell, and I was just blown away. So I'm talking to my friend, and I start talking shit. I go, man, Matheny could never play like this. This is like so much better than, you know. And I'm just talking shit.
Right.
I turn around and Pat Metheny's sitting right there.
And
And he's
then you're
looking right
like,
at me.
oh, this is a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and they all recognize what they're doing, like they're in tune with each other.
Yes.
I remember,
I was
yeah.
so embarrassed.
Oh,
I
sure.
couldn't believe, you know, who talks shit about your hero
Yeah.
and then
And
you turn around and
turn
he's
around
sitting
and he's
right there.
sitting right there.
Yeah, it's never going to happen in Miami, right? What was it, in New York or anything?
Yeah.
So concert ended. Matheny's in the corner. And I walk up to him and I'm pretending like you know, I said, "Oh, I'm such a huge fan," you know. And he was so nice. He was like, "Oh, you know," because
Yeah.
I enjoyed you watching the show, and I was like, "Jesus Christ,
That's great.
idiot,"
Yeah.
you know.
Pat,
But
no,
that was
Pat is really sweet. When
yeah.
he was rehearsing with us at USC, I did a version of James,
Oh wow.
and I handed it to him. We're starting the rehearsal, and there's a few people observing the rehearsal in there.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Do you have a pencil?" And I said, "Sure." He
Uh,
sits down with my arrangement and he crosses all the chords I wrote out and wrote in
really?
all these chords. And oh man, I wish I had that. I don't know where that went, but
Were they all wrong or
I,
something? Or
I have the mini disc recording of that rehearsal, and I have the mini disc recording of the concert he did in 101 with Diorio, where they played all the things like right about here for about 20 minutes, and Solar, and
you
they
knew how
played.
insensitive?
Yeah, I think
That's
so.
on
Yes.
video. I saw that.
Oh
That's
man.
killing.
Oh, it was so great. That was I was on cloud nine. And Pat was really nice throughout it and talked to a lot of us and had good. I remember asking him, I said, "Man, what books are you reading right now?" And he said, "Oh, a lot of Thomas the Tank Engine and Sesame Street," because his kids were like 2 or 3. Said, "Yeah, we're reading Thomas the Tank Engine a lot."
That's great.
Yeah, and then I asked him, and this was before YouTube, before stuff. We played a concert with him at SC, and I said, well, he had his synth guitar, he had the Roland synth, and he
Yeah.
was sitting there with a wrench, getting it set up. And I walked up to him and I said, "Man, Pat, this has been just so incredible. Do you mind if I record this tonight? I promise I won't share it or whatever." And Pat was like, "Yeah, man, no problem. No
Yeah.
problem."
Yeah.
And I often wonder if he would say something different now, because I know he's been so vocal about people putting up old concerts on YouTube. I mean, we all feel that way. Scott Henderson
Yeah.
is that way too, about like taking down everything that's on
I
YouTube.
heard about that. Do you ever listen
Yeah,
to the Guitar Wank podcast? You ever
I
listen to
do
that
listen. It's a
Foreman?
good one. Yeah.
It's funny. Foreman's so funny, man. He's so
Yep.
great.
Yep.
I like to
They're,
get him on here. I don't know if he would do it or not, but you
Yeah,
know.
I'm sure he would, man. This is your I love your podcast idea. It's cool. I mean, I'm so grateful you'd have me on
Thank
this
you,
to
man.
do this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I don't know if you're got stuff to do or whatever. I don't have a time limit or whatever, but I don't want
Yeah.
to like, keep
No, I'm good. I've got a few more minutes here, and
cool.
I Love to call my girlfriend Ashley before she goes to bed. Make sure she's doing good.
There
I
you
think she
go.
might be
There you go.
listening in. She said she texted me and said she was listening in. So hey,
Oh,
Ashley.
really? Is there anyone you're hosting the Facebook Live? Anybody that
Yeah, I'm looking on here. Let's see. Peter Rude checked in. My friend Barbara Leitner, Taylor Hatch, great
uh
young guitar player. Let's see. Peter Hendrickson of Hendrickson Amplifiers.
I gotta try his
Yeah,
amps, man. I haven't tried them. I know you endorse his amps and you use them, right?
Hendricksons. Oh yeah, I love
Gotta
them.
check them out.
I love him. Yeah, and Peter is a great guy, and I mean, man, I'm all about supporting people like him who
Yeah,
create gear for musicians like us who aren't the big rock stars.
yeah, yeah. You know
Yeah.
what amp? Because you know what's funny is I'm a huge gearhead, and this is my third one. And we haven't talked any gear with anybody, which is funny because like most of the time I talk gear with a lot of people. We
I
don't even
know.
do a lot of it, but
No, it's fine.
you know what amp I got recently that I'm like over the moon with is I don't know if you've checked out the Fender Tone Master series.
Yes, I have.
Dude, I have their deluxe reverb. It's incredible, man. You
I
can pick it
played
up
it.
from
I
Kinky.
played it at the NAMM show in that loud Fender room, and I was like, man, this amp sounds really good.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I compared it to some tube ones, and at the time, I couldn't tell the difference. You know, I don't own a tube one because I have other amps, but I tell you, it sounds really good, man. Really,
yeah,
and I'm not a big solid state guy. I'm actually a tube guy,
yeah.
and I had another solid state amp that was really good, but I compared it to the Fender and I really liked it a lot more. So I sold the other one, and I'm a tube guy through and through, but man, that's a great solid state amp. Holy crap.
Yeah, I've always found a need for both. I've had Polytones and Hendricksons, and I use them for real specific kind of gigs that I need a real punchy mid range that like I need to play outdoors or like a casual gig or something that's like I need jazz guitar sound. And what's those amps are kind of fascinating because you set the dials wherever and they all kind of sound the same. I mean, the Hendricksons definitely sound nicer than the Polytones. You
Yeah,
can really, really dial in your sound. I love the 5-band EQ,
yeah,
and I love the bud and the blue. I love the size of those amps. To be able to just haul that around is just a godsend.
yeah.
But I have a 67 Vibrolux that is
Oh
just
man.
kick ass, and that's the amp I use when I need to really crank and play my L5 and get that big, fat, old school sound. So it's like my Marchioni, I play that guitar a lot through the Fender, but also through the solid states. The L5, I almost always just play it through the Vibrolux because it's just the perfect pairing. I'd love to find another one, but those amps are so expensive, $3,000 to $4,000 now.
I-
So
Have you played a vintage sound?
yeah, those are really nice too. The guy in Florida that makes those.
I have
Um,
one of those. It's a Vibrolux, but it's a 112 Vibrolux,
hmm.
and it
You,
sounds really good.
how do you like that compared to your car amp?
It's different. Um, I go through all my gear. I'm constantly flipping stuff. I change my mind, but I kind of like doing that because it really tells me what my sound is. Because
Yeah.
you can play something in a store for 10 minutes that you're not going to get anything out of it. You have to
No.
buy it, own it, gig with it, and you
Yeah.
either like it or you don't, right? So I have a car Sportsman, which is a 20 watt, and I really love it. I had an Impala, which is a 45 watt,
Hmm.
which is very loud, and I did sell it. I sold it to buy the vintage sound
Yeah.
because the car I wanted something very Fendery, and the car is Fender-ish,
Yes.
but the vintage sound is Fender, pretty.
Okay. Cool.
But I kind of regret selling the car because the
Yeah.
Impala had this warmth to it.
I had a Rambler. I had a
And
Rambler for
really
many
good.
years, and I kind of regret selling it. I sold it when I needed some cash flow to make a move
Mm-hmm.
and put a deposit on an apartment. And I kind of, in a way, I regret it. But we all have gear like that we let go. I sold a beautiful Gibson Tal Farlow. I should have kept that guitar.
Oh man.
I haven't sold a whole lot of guitars though. I've kept a lot. I don't buy a lot of guitars. I mean, my Marchioni, my L5 to me are like the be all end all. There's
Yeah.
really nothing more I'm going to ever search for arch tops. But,
Yeah.
um, but there's, I'm always kind of thinking about getting an extra solid body around, another semi hollow, something like that would be really cool to
You should
have.
try a Collings, man.
I know they're really nice.
Check this out. This is my Stoco 16 LC,
Yeah.
and it's just perfection. And
Yeah, man.
I have a few Collings, man. I'm very lucky. They I'm kind of one of their artists. They have different levels of artists. Like, they don't put me on their website or anything, but they definitely give me, the hookup or
That's
whatever.
great. I mean,
And
it's a
I love it.
I support these smaller. I love independent luthiers, and I
Yeah,
love the smaller mom pop style shops.
yeah,
Fender, Gibson, these companies have their role in the marketplace. We need big, large it's weird to say
sure.
this. You need kind of big, large corporate companies building guitars that go in Best Buy and Guitar Center and all that stuff.
Yeah,
But, the fact of the matter is, the heyday of Gibson and Fender being the only games in town have been long gone for a long time.
sure. Yeah.
And if all of our heroes would have been around today, back then they were all playing Gibsons, but now they'd be
They would have
playing
played whatever.
Collings and all these
Bluegrass.
other guitars. Who knows what Wes would be playing.
Yeah.
So I'm a big supporter of those guys. And yeah, Collings makes beautiful steel string guitars, man. Whew.
I have an OM1 cutaway, so it's like an OM18.
Hmm.
And I love acoustics, man. I just recently
Yeah.
got I had a Martin OM28V.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful guitar, but it had a big, thick V-neck, and I finally realized, like, it's too thick for me. So I sold it, and I got a regular OM28 with a
Yeah, man.
more modern neck, and I love it. It's so nice, man.
Yeah,
What's
man.
your cutaway Martin you have? I saw on your gear. What do you?
I had, and I have a student who's borrowing that right now. That's an OMC1-E. That's a baseline OM with a cutaway. It's a
Okay.
nice guitar for a session that you need to just get a pop acoustic guitar sound with, or something folksy.
Yeah.
But my Jeff Traugott is still my be all end all steel string guitar. That guitar I had made for me 8 years ago, and it just keeps just sounding like a cannon.
I've never heard of that guy.
Yeah, yeah. His
Who is
guitars
he?
are his guitars are really incredible.
Oh, that's
He's
beautiful.
up in Santa Cruz, and yeah, and nice
That's
Brazilian
mahogany or rosewood in the back? Mahogany.
Brazilian rosewood.
Oh, Jesus! Wow,
Yeah, yeah.
that must sound amazing.
It is. It's a one of a kind acoustic guitar. As I put it back on my rack here carefully.
Do you miss not having a cutaway?
Not with that guitar. No, not with
Yeah.
that guitar. Not with the way I play that guitar, but with the Martin, it's nice to have that to pull it out.
Yeah, because this new Martin that I got, it has the more modern neck, and it doesn't have a cutaway, and I kind of don't miss it.
Yeah.
It plays really easy. My Collings that I have has a cutaway,
Yeah.
and that's a great guitar too. I mean, I'm very, very blessed. I'm a gearhead. I collect guitars, and
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's part of this LA guitar hang too, man. I tell you, we own more guitars in Los Angeles.
yeah,
I mean, there is everything here. That's why I love representing Steve Marchioni and Traugott, because there's not a lot of guys that play those guitars here. So it's fun to get out and play them. People are always asking about my arch top, where I got that, who makes it.
that's a beautiful guitar.
They're great. They're really great. Pretty high price tag on a guitar like that, but for the right kind of player, it's a cool instrument to have for sure.
Have you checked out Cohen Top?
Yes, those are nice too. Yep.
I've seen him. They look beautiful, and I talked to him.
Yeah, he follows me on Facebook, and so I'm always looking at his guitars.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to him. I think he's a little out of my range, though.
Yeah.
He's pretty high up there. I had a Victor Baker for
Oh
years,
yeah. Yep.
and I ended up selling it, and it was a really nice guitar. But at the time when I had him make it, I wasn't particular enough, so the neck was very thin.
Yeah, exactly.
Too thin for me. I couldn't play it, and I might have him make me another one because he does make good guitars, and now he moved to San Diego.
Yeah, and he's a guitar luthier who you really see the progression of someone who's built 500 guitars.
Yeah, and he
And
plays
once
too, which is a big
it
help.
seems like luthiers get to that 300 guitar mark and they've really got their thing going on. And I remember watching his when I was in high school. Victor Baker was one of the first luthiers that I saw. I was like, man, if I mowed enough lawns, I might be able to buy one of those, because I
Yeah,
wanted an arch top so bad.
He was
I
affordable.
He
That's
was
why I
very
bought his
affordable,
guitar.
very affordable. And I know that he's taken a lot of inspiration from Marchione too.
Mhm.
I think he might have even studied with him at one point. They were in New York at the same time together. Steven was working for Roger Sadowski at Pensa Sur Guitars.
Yeah.
And I think guys like Victor Baker, Pablo Valle, they were working with Marchione on some stuff.
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
think. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, Baker is incredible, man. And what a great time for students. There's so many great affordable guitars. I mean, there's been several new Eastmans I've played I really like. There's
Great.
some of the new there was one model of D'Angelico that's kind of their like mastercraft model I played really great.
Mhm.
And then you can always get your hands on a very cool vintage 175. You know, there's
Mhm.
guys at Howard Paul over at Benedetto. Those guys are really sweet guys, and they sure are like the torch carrier type of jazz guitar guys that really want to keep that going.
Yeah.
That Bucky Pizzarelli and those guys, and they've structured a whole business model around a guitar company for that. I mean, it's pretty impressive. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool. And they build some nice guitars. It's not really my thing, but they build some really nice guitars.
Have you tried Campalone?
Oh yeah,
What'd you think of his?
really, really, really great.
Because he's very affordable, and I
Yeah,
almost because anything like past 6, 8 grand, I can't afford it, you know. And
yeah,
he's like, you can get well, he can go up, but the
yeah.
base model is like 55, which is like,
Yeah, well, you've got Linda Manzer, Steve Marchione, and John Monteleone that are all up there in the $25,000 to
yeah,
$35,000 range now.
that's way up above my pay grade, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
Camp
don't even
is
think
worth
John
checking out.
Monteleone. I don't even think John Monteleone is taking orders anymore. I think he's only building guitars that he is designing, and then they're going to market. He had a really cool line. I'm a train buff. I collect model trains. He had a line of guitars he was building named after all the old Streamliner trains, the Super Chief, the
Oh wow,
Coast Starlight. Oh my God, he had all these cool guitars he was designing after these trains. I was just about going crazy. And I think they sold for $250,000 for the whole set. Yeah.
wow.
Hmm.
So I should look into Campalone then.
Yeah, those are great. Those are really great.
I
And
heard they're
so
very
are Victor
good.
Baker's, John Buscarino, really, really great guitar maker.
Okay.
And there's some good guitars coming out of Japan, Westville and
Yeah,
Archtop
Andy has
Tribute.
one of those.
Yep. And Maffa in Italy.
Yeah. My friend Peter has a Mappa.
Yeah, I played
Man.
when I was in Berlin in 2007. Perry and I were hanging with Kurt Rosenwinkel, and Kurt had just got one of the first Maffas.
Uh,
It was one of the first ones. In fact, I think Maffa built it for Kurt.
wow.
And this kind of semi-hollow / fully hollow. Man, I played that. Kurt was like, check this thing out. And I was like, what is, who made this? And he's like, some guy up in the Italian Alps.
Wow.
And now those guitars, Adam Radner plays them. Now
He's
they're
got a
a little bit
Mappa.
more, they're people, some guys in New York have them. They're sweet. They're sweet. And then there's a few guys in Europe. Sontag builds some nice guitars too.
Bruce Foreman, right?
Hmm.
They're pretty high up there, though, huh?
I think so. I don't know. I don't keep up on prices.
Yeah.
Plus, when it comes to European guitars, sometimes you can get pretty good deals when the dollar is strong. Same thing with Japanese guitars.
See, my thing, I'm more of a semi-hollow guy. That's really my main voice, but I do like arch tops. I have my Collings arch top that I love, but it's a laminate, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to get another solid wood arch top, and I'm kind of thinking about,
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend crazy money because I'm not going to play it that often. I only play
Yeah.
arch tops when I'm doing duo and solo guitar. If I'm with a group, I never play an arch top ever.
Yeah. Mark Campalone is good, and Victor Baker really great.
Yeah,
I think
those are
for
probably
that.
the two guys I'm looking at right now.
There's another guy, Bryant Trenier, who's in New Jersey, who builds some pretty incredible guitars. If you go to archtop.com, he has a 16-inch Broadway model right now that is pretty sweet. It's got a foil pickup on it. So,
Really interesting.
man, I could go on and on and on and on with gear.
Me too.
We should do a whole nother thing just on gear, Dwayne.
I would like to, because I'm a gear guy, man. I could talk about my guitars I have, and
then we get the followers on Facebook, because
yeah,
they all come out like piranhas, and then we all start talking, and it's just
yeah. It has nothing to do with music, but it is fun. Like,
I agree, man. It's fast. It's a fascinating part of our culture. And
yeah,
again,
and
I
like
just
I
wish.
said, gear doesn't have anything to do with how well you play. I mean, it has is playing guitar players that have one guitar that
Yeah,
are amazing. It's just fun, and it's one of those things where if you're blessed enough to have the income or whatever. I'm not rich at all, but
yeah,
like I'm married and all this stuff, so I'm able to get some gear, and I love gear, man.
yep.
It's just fun. It's just fun.
Well, let's follow up. Let's do another one of these. And for everybody
Yeah.
else watching, be sure to check out Dwayne's page on YouTube for this stuff. And man, just thanks for having me tonight.
Thank you
Um,
for coming, man.
I've
Learned
got
a
to
lot.
probably split, but I mean, man, really fun, dude. Fun
Yeah,
chatting with you. Thank you for everything. Thanks for bringing the community together and doing this. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know.
I appreciate everything. And where can if anyone wants to check out your music, and I feel bad we didn't even talk about Ponderosa and the New West Guitar
No,
Group and all that stuff.
no need to. People find out that stuff with one click on all these pages. It's all good, man. I
Yeah.
just wanted to
So
be in the moment and chat with you, dude.
yeah, I appreciate you hanging, and I love your playing. And we have
Thanks,
never
man.
played a gig together. We
I know
gotta
we've
play, dude. I think
never
we.
played a gig. One of these days we'll actually play a gig,
Yeah,
Dwayne.
yeah. Any gig, right?
Yeah, man.
Well, thank you so much for coming out and doing this. And hopefully we can talk soon.
We will, dude. We will. We
All
will.
right, brother. We'll see you soon. Good luck, man. Have a good one.
Have a good night, man.
Okay.